Nydiamar got a pretty big update. It's overhauled how we earn devotion points and faction reputation, adds a whole ton of quality of life stuff, and even adds some new quests to the already pretty big overhaul of the campaign. If you've never heard of this mod, it's basically a complete campaign overhaul with a brand new map, a bunch of new locations, and super interesting roguelike dungeons, quests, and even some new items scattered around the world. The campaign itself hasn't changed too much other than some new quests and quality of life stuff to make it easier to navigate. It's still the great mod that it always was, that I've always loved, and if you want to hear my thoughts about that, you can check my old video out on this mod, even though some things are a little bit outdated, because right now, I just want to talk about the new stuff that have been added. The first thing you'll notice if you've played the mod before is how much the beginning portion has improved in readability and even in the balance regarding the giant difficulty spike that used to be at the beginning. You only have to read one piece of dialogue when you interact with the first lectern, which gives you the option to play normally and simply walk over to the edge of eternity to begin, where before you had to read through so many different things for all of the different head start options and different ways to play. All of those options are still in the game. It's just that it's not kind of blasted right in your face right when you start the mod, which is going to be great for all of the new players that maybe want to jump right into this mod. Then there's a new beginning quest sequence where you will go to sleep and go through this dream sequence in a nightmare version of Devil's Crossing, where you'll spend the first few levels auto-attacking basic zombies just like you would in the vanilla game. This whole beginning part is brand new, and it's a very welcome change because originally you were basically forced to start the mod with the level 15 head start option, since the difficulty spike at the beginning where you're dropped off in the forest with the horde of skeletons was way too rough, but now you'll have a much more smoother leveling experience that is more in line with what you'd expect from the vanilla version of the game. Then you'll be put on a quest to visit the two new big areas in this update, the Devotion Dungeon and the Faction area. You might first stumble into the Devotion Dungeon through the trapdoor by the vendors in the Edge of Eternity. This place brings a huge overhaul to how you actually earn devotion points. You'll begin by searching the world for these devotion spheres, and the shrine in the center of the Devotion Dungeon hub will give you hints on the location of each of these orbs. Most of them are pretty easy to find as long as you're going through that area anyways. The first one you'll find in the wasp-infested area in the Houghton Mine, and you'll always see a devotion shrine icon on your mini-map when one is nearby. The only weird one is in the tomb, where you have to activate a random unlit torch to unveil a hidden area where the devotion orb is. Other than that, the rest are pretty simple to find as long as you're going to be exploring that area anyways. There are 6 orbs throughout the world. Each orb will unlock a different dungeon, each with their own very interesting gimmicks loosely based on the dungeon their orb is found in, and each dungeon will reward you with various amounts of devotion points. The first dungeon is the Adventurous Cavern found in the Houghton Mine, like I just mentioned, which is a really cool little text adventure with choices leading you through multiple branches with waves of combat and different mechanics like wounds that debuff you during the dungeon, items like torches and band-aids that you can use throughout that adventure, and super important choices that are permanent even after death or reloading the instance. The Adventurous Cavern ends with 3 shrines, and if you're able to complete it fast enough by making the right decisions, you might not even have to pay any materials to fix those shrines. The other dungeons are really cool too. For example, you have stuff like a spike-filled labyrinth with urns blocking your way from the tomb, an illusion dungeon with scattered shrines that are a bunch of illusions and only 3 real shrines from Odal Ayla's dungeon. And the final dungeon is found from the Ashes, which is the final zone of the mod. It's actually super difficult, especially in the later difficulties, but it does reward you with 6 devotion points. But you really have to make sure your chaos resist is capped for this. Devotion points are obviously a core integral part of any build in Grim Dawn, so you're basically forced to interact with this system. So luckily, I find it very fun to actually play. In the old version of this mod, you'd just be handed devotion points simply for leveling up. Now we have to explore the world and work for these devotion points. It's much harder and much more spread apart than the vanilla game, so you will be expecting different power spikes at different points than you're used to. Like I said, most of these orbs are pretty simple to find, but most are found in roguelike dungeons, some at the very end of them, like the Sanctuary dungeon for example, that requires a pretty strong build and an understanding of the dungeon mechanic to get through on the higher difficulties. The next big update takes form of the faction area, which is a big overhaul of how faction reputation is actually earned. The faction area has all of the normal Grim Dawn factions that we're all familiar with, scattered around their own little areas with all of their faction merchants to purchase items from. The main attraction of this area is the Faction Arena, a new roguelike dungeon that costs faction tickets that you'll be receiving as a reward from most of the quests in this mod, and rewards you with a bunch of different items, most importantly faction tokens, which can be turned in for a massive amount of faction reputation from any faction of your choice. The dungeon's pretty fun. It's separated into 3 parts, each getting harder and costing more bits and faction tickets as you go. Each section has multiple rooms that are randomly chosen, different waves of monsters in each room, and always leads to the final room with a big boss fight at the end, and then a reward room with a bunch of chests and an option to either leave the dungeon and gather your tokens or continue for a chance of getting even more tokens. This whole system is to make up for the lack of normal vanilla quests that would normally grant us a bunch of faction rep. I'm not going to complain because, like I said, it's a really fun dungeon and it even rewards you with a whole bunch of other stuff on top of the faction tokens, like loot orbs. And the loot orbs are this new type of loot that you receive through most quests and most roguelike dungeons in this mod that can stack up in your inventory, and you can pop at the Lectern of Wisdom at any time for a big loot explosion with items and rarities depending on the type of loot orb that you're popping. You have the basic common, uncommon, valuable, and legendary loot orbs that give you the loot that you'd expect from their names, and you have a bunch of different types of loot orbs like materials, blueprints, and random orbs that give you 1 to 35 items. These are really fun. The mod creator really knows how to get that dopamine rush going with these orbs, and with a lot of the mechanics of these roguelike dungeons as well. I'm actually really surprised that something like this isn't done in many other action RPGs, because it just feels so good to pop all those at once, because they stack basically infinitely in your inventory, so it's really fun to collect a bunch of these through the bounties and then just kind of go crazy and see what items that you get. Those are the 3 biggest new things in this update. Like I said, there's a bunch of other quality of life stuff. I think the biggest one is that now all of the bounties from the Lectern of Questing are requiring automatically collected tokens from slain monsters rather than spamming your screen with quest updates every time you kill one of 1000 skeletons or whatever your quest is. If you want a big tip for playing through this mod, make sure you always have a heroes bounty whenever you can, since heroes are literally everywhere, and any time you spend without a hero bounty is basically time wasted that you can be getting these awesome rewards from these bounties. Another big quality of life update is color coding of most quests, which isn't a huge deal, but it makes navigating all of these little side quests so much easier. I actually like this a lot more than I think I should. Overall, I'm in love with this update. This mod is so good, and you need to play it if you haven't already. There's so much content in here. It's the same old Grim Dawn that we all know and love with the same mechanics. It's still a great action RPG, but this mod basically just adds a whole bunch of new stuff to do. I hope this video was able to help you understand some of the new mechanics of this mod. I wanted to refrain from giving out the information on every single dungeon location and every single new quest added, so you can kind of explore that yourself, because that's really the whole point of this update. But if you have any questions, let me know in the comments and I'll try and answer, or you can just visit the official forum of this mod, where you can also find the link to support the mod creator via PayPal, which is a great idea if you can, since there has been so much work put into this and I think that the guy really deserves it. But as always, thank you for watching and have a great day.